Where are your fabric scraps right now? Are they overflowing drawers, hiding in garbage bags, or jammed into a cupboard? Are you overwhelmed with the thought of pulling them out and organizing them? Managing your scraps is an important part of any craft, and I have 10 tips to help you conquer Mount Scrapmore. So stick with me and I'll show you how to do it. Hi, I'm Karen Brown of Just Get It Done Quilts. I give you tips, tricks, and strategies to help you make the quilt that you want to make. And if you like what you see, please click that subscribe button. I love scraps, but even I get tired of dealing with them sometimes. So here are my top 10 tips for keeping them under control. It doesn't matter what craft you do, managing scraps is a challenge. I was talking with a woodworker last week, and we had exactly the same issues in both of our crafts. We know how much we've spent on supplies, and we don't want to waste a square inch. And most of us have been brought up thrifty. Plus there's sustainability to think about too. But dumping your scraps into a bag, littering them all over your space is not doing you any favors either. Scraps happen to everyone, so let's release the shame and guilt and get a plan together. Stop thinking that you have to organize your scraps all in one sitting. This is not a once and done activity because scraps happen with every project that you make, large or small. What we really want is for scraps to flow through our space, which I'm now calling the scrap stream. That is, the rate that we are producing our scraps should equal the rate that we're consuming them, which means if we are making more scraps than we consume, our space will always be in flood, which leads us to, what do you actually want to do with your scraps? It's not what you can do, it's what do you want to do with them. And that's a big difference. Are you wanting to make sampler blocks? Are you wanting to make string blocks? Are you making placemats? Do you even want to use your scraps? If you don't know what you want to make, why make the effort to organize them? Starting with the end in mind will give your scraps purpose. So you'll never wonder, why am I doing this? And you can change what you want to do. Just because last year you made mug rugs, you can change your system this year to make strip blocks. Personally, I've had some tried and true, easy peasy blocks that I've been making for the last 4 years, but I'm seriously thinking of new layouts to keep myself challenged. It is a universal truth that if it's too complicated or difficult to do, you're not going to do it. So keep your system simple. If you sort your scraps by color, and then in 5 different sizes, that can be over 40 different piles of scraps, just in fabric. Plus you have to find a place to store it and buy containers to keep it in. But if you do the opposite and just dump all of your scraps into one pile, and every time you need a scrap to go sort through it, that's fiddly, messy, and exhausting. So you need to find a happy balance between the two, made for you and how you like to sew, and what projects you like to make. Personally, I keep my printed fabric in 5 different sizes. I make 10-inch squares, 5-inch strips, 2.5-inch strips, less than 2.5-inch strips, and crumbs, because these sizes feed into the projects that I like to make. My solids I sort by color, not by size, because I normally do improv exercises with these. Check out my scrappy playlist. Working with scraps is tiring. Not only are you making a ton of decisions, each fabric scrap has a story behind it, bringing up memories of past projects. So use your timer. It is your best friend when you are processing or sewing your scraps. Put it on for either 15 or 30-minute increments and tidy up often. So when scrap fatigue sets in, and it will, you can easily put everything away. And managing your scraps should be a regular task as needs be. I do mine weekly, but only for 30 minutes to keep my tray full but not overflowing. But for you, it might be better monthly, bi-monthly, or quarterly to keep your Mount Scrapmore under control. Remember that scrap stream. Do what works for you. Since scraps are not precious, resist the temptation to over-curate them. Use your scraps as an opportunity to play and experiment. This is the time to test out new or random color combinations, so you play outside your regular color zone. This is also the chance to see how different pattern combinations work together, and mixing types of patterns together, like this primitive with this modern Tula pink. You can also experiment with value and see how a fabric's value can change with its size. I like using scraps on the back of my quilts, often in the opposite way of my friends. Where the top is block-based, I often do an improv on the back with lots of negative space. And I call this an after quilt. I've made several videos on this, and I will link them down in the video notes below. Some days we want to work on fussy and intricate patterns. And some days we are lucky if we can focus enough on finding our sewing machines. Whether you're having a bad day, a bad week, a bad month, or even a bad year, having some easy go-to scrap projects to work on can help you reboot. By having your scraps prepared and sewing the same block over and over again is easier on your brain, because you've just eliminated all sorts of decision-making in planning a quilt. It's also a project where you can let the blocks accumulate organically over time, so there's no deadlines. Whether you're working on a simple sampler block or it's a quilt-as-you-go block, let the project nurture you and help you get back on track. To upgrade any of your skills, it's not about buying a new thingamabob. It's about hours of practice. Use your time making scrap blocks and quilts as your chance to improve. It is the perfect opportunity to learn about precision and mastering that 1/4-inch seam. That doesn't mean that you have to get out your stitch ripper. It's about repeatedly doing the same block over and over again, always trying for perfection, but not worrying when it's not. And that also holds true when you're experimenting and playing with color and pattern. Even some of Serena Williams' shots went out of bounds. Don't be afraid to let fabric go. We get in this groove about saving and preserving that we often miss the nicks and cuts or a frayed seam. And if the fabric bled in one project, it's going to bleed in a scrap quilt too. You're still investing your time, money, and effort into making a scrap quilt. Don't let saving one scrap of fabric create a bigger problem. And if scraps in general give you a headache, there are plenty of quilters out there that will gladly take those scraps off your hands. You might also discover that your scrap stream is not balanced. That is, you're making more scraps than you want to consume them. Take the time to find somebody who will take the excess. Working with scraps produce more threads than you can possibly imagine. It covers your clothes, your sewing spaces, not to mention the floor. Mando and I have even watched some dust balls flow out in the hall and down the stairs. You cannot eliminate the dust and the threads, but here are some tips. Don't trim your blocks or strips until you use them, or you might find that you need to trim them again. Ask me how I know that one. When you're at the iron, trim as many threads as you can see. Use your snips, don't pull, or you might cause more fraying. When the top is finished, be sure to measure your quilt and write it down on a piece of paper. Then fold the top with the wrong sides together and pin the paper to the flimsy. And try not to open it again until it's time to quilt it. And of course, keep a foam square nearby to grab the thread off your table, a lint brush for yourself, and a broom and dustpan for the floor. Let scraps be a reminder not to overbuy. It's incredible with the number of scrap projects that I have made. I'm still finding fabric pieces from my first quilts. It is so much easier to deal with less than deal with remnants and scraps. So only buy what you need. If the pattern calls for a half a yard, only buy half a yard. In my experience, most designers have already baked in some wiggle room. If you want to find out more on how I use crumbs, make after quilts, my scrappy blocks, or some quilt-as-you-go methods, check out my Scrappy playlist here. Take care, and I'll see you next time.